You are listening to KPCA LP Petaluma 103.3 FM and streaming online at kpca.fm. Welcome, listeners, to the launch of Women in the Situation Room, brought to you by your Sonoma County Commission on the Status of Women. I'll be your host, Tricia Almond, one of three commissioners representing District 2 and the current chair. Now, for those of you wondering, what is the Commission on the Status of Women? The Commission was established December of 1975 with the charge of taking affirmative action to eliminate the practice of discrimination and prejudice because of gender in the areas of housing, education, community services, and related issues. Since that time, appointed commissioners have worked tirelessly on a voluntary basis to keep Sonoma County's governing body, the Board of Supervisors, aware of the issues impacting women and girls in our county. Our mission is to promote equal rights and opportunities that enhance the quality of life for women and girls, and to address issues of discrimination and prejudice that negatively affect women in Sonoma County. In support of our mission through 2022, the Commission will be focusing on the issues of gender equity, the impacts of COVID as it relates to food insecurity and inadequate childcare, as well as voices of Sonoma County women. I'll be sharing details on what these ad hocs are working on and how to become a commissioner in a future Women in the Situation Room show, so stay tuned for another show. In addition to the ad hocs, the Commission provides mentorship to youth in the form of our Junior Commissioner Project. And through collaboration, outreach, and the work of our Legislative Advisory Group, the Commission supports efforts to encourage women to seek elected and appointed positions, eradicate human trafficking, prevent elder abuse, protect reproductive and healthcare rights of women and girls. And speaking of collaborations, with us today are representatives of two Sonoma County organizations, Mary Frances Walsh, Executive Director of the Sonoma County National Alliance on Mental Illness, known as NAMI, and Debbie McKay, President of the Sonoma County League of Women Voters. Before we begin our conversation, I want to remind you, listeners, you're listening to KPCA LP 103.3 FM and streaming online at kpca.fm. Welcome, Mary Frances and Debbie. Thank you for joining the Commission's launch of Women in the Situation Room. Hi, Mary Frances.
Hi, Tricia. Thank you very much for having us.
Oh, I'm so glad you were brave enough to join me on this launch.
Happy to be here.
So let's start out with sharing the mission of NAMI and a bit of history on the organization, along with your personal history with NAMI.
So the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, is about 41 years old. It's a nationwide organization, and it came about just over 40 years ago after there were many state hospitals across the country that were closed, and thousands, tens of thousands of people who had been essentially housed in these hospitals for many years and separated from their families. When those hospitals were closed, they were released with the thought that they would be provided care back in their communities and that they'd all be better off closer to home where they could have a connection with their families and be supported by their families in whatever their journey toward recovery from their mental illness was. But what happened was that there were many promises made about funding of community mental health care that would replace the state hospital level of care. The funding has never adequately come through, and states and counties have been left on their own without much federal support to be able to provide these services. The families who welcomed back loved ones were left grappling with sometimes the issues that are related to having somebody with serious mental illness in your home. behaviors can be disruptive. There could be suicidal ideation or intent or attempts. They may be people who don't honor a schedule within a family. It just, in many cases, created ruptures within the family environment. And families felt they had no support, no professional support, no organizational support. And they began meeting in small groups. There were at least 9 different groups that met in the state of California alone. They just found each other and they tried to educate themselves about mental illness and about resources and learn about what they could do to make their life better for their family member and life better for themselves at the same time. And this was happening here. It was happening in the state of Wisconsin and in a few other states. And they actually merged and met at the University of Wisconsin at Madison in 1970 and agreed to form this alliance. And it's grown dramatically through the years. So it's much bigger than anybody, I think, had envisioned at that time. There are over 500 chapters across the United States. There's a national headquarters outside of Washington, D.C. Every state has a NAMI state office. And then in California alone, there are over 60 different affiliates. And so we are the affiliate for Sonoma County. And the programs that we carry out in this county are duplicated throughout the country. So we offer education and we offer support. And basically our programs are peer-led. That means that if it's a support group that's for family members supporting somebody with a mental illness, it is led by a family member. If it's a support group for somebody in recovery from mental illness, it is led by a person who is well into recovery from their illness. But it's never just lived experience alone. We provide training. And NAMI at the national level creates the curriculums that we follow for our classes and the training packages that people need to complete in order to be either a teacher of one of our classes or a support group leader. Answer enough of your questions. And here in Sonoma County, this is our 37th year that we've been around for quite some time. And we had an original group of family members who met in the Santa Rosa area, who were all parents of adult children who lived with schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. They found one another. They were part of this group that met and grew the national organization.
I have to say, personally, I wish I had known about NAMI, not quite 30 years ago. So 15 years ago with my eldest daughter. I felt like once she was released back to us, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to help her, and assumed that it was a one-time thing as far as a suicide attempt. And the only education I got was through reading. But I didn't do that reading until after the second attempt. And that's when I learned that usually if there's a first attempt, there's one within the next year. So I could have definitely used a support group.
Emergency room with your daughter the first time around and weren't told or warned that could happen.
Nothing. In fact, the doctor that was treating her, in front of her, to us, in front of her, they said, well, it was a good thing she took, I think it was ibuprofen, because if she had taken acetaminophen, she'd be dead. And all I could think of was, why don't you just pass her the gun right now? Yeah. That's exactly how I felt.
Emergency departments, they are high-tech medical environments. They are not designed really to be the right place for people in a mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. Assuming that someone hasn't, if they need medical care, that's a different issue. That should be resolved, and then they should be cared for in an mm-hmm. environment. They need soothing. They need being listened to. They need comfort. But our standard medical education for doctors who do not go into psychiatry, even for nurses, there is very minimal training about mm-hmm. mental illness And they have a lot to learn. I understand that. Not everybody can master this information. You know, what we teach and provide is certainly based on research. We work with the Center for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Mental Health. We're not just making this stuff up, what we teach. It's all based on research.
Right. When she was released from the facility, we sat with her and a social worker, and I just kept looking at her thinking, I don't want to take her home. It scared me to take her home the way she looked. And they said, no, she's ready to go home. And I don't know, a couple weeks went by and I felt like, okay, I can start walking to work again. And I walked to work and I get a phone call from him. And this is from her. It's like 6:30 in the morning and she's barely audible. And she says, Mom, I need you to come home. She should have been preparing to go to school. And I panicked, and I'd walked 3 miles away. I had walked. Thankfully, I knew somebody was on the way to work, took me back home, and she had cut her arms again. And I could not find a psychiatrist. At that point, we still had not found a psychiatrist because most psychiatrists don't want to deal with teenagers. So I ended up calling the insurance company based on her therapist's suggestion and threatened them that if they don't help me find a psychiatrist, they're going to deal with another suicide attempt. And that's how we got the psychiatrist, which was pretty pathetic.
Yes.
Very pathetic. Definitely, absolutely no support. And then there's the shame of, oh, this is in our family. That took time to overcome and then be able to share it and empower others that, watch for this. And since then, there have been other, girls in my Girl Scout troop, or other people that have said their daughter went through it or their son went through it. But there's definitely a lack of support. And I don't know how, I guess just not being told and maybe not doing enough research of not finding out an organization like yours.
Right.
I don't know if it would have benefited her because she didn't like group situations and still doesn't, but it would have helped me. It might have helped our other daughter.
And with help for you, you are more equipped to be the support person that your daughter or your loved one needs. There's just no doubt about it. Yeah. You need a safe place to be able to talk about your own fears and your own frustrations, and learn, you do.
Yeah. And unfortunately now, fortunately now at least, when she's a little off kilter, we're brave enough to say, are you okay? How are you feeling? Whereas before, there was a fear of asking. We didn't really want to know.
Yes. And we've learned that
yes.
You cannot plant the seed of suicide in someone's mind. It's already there. But in so many cases, it is such a relief to be asked because they are holding it up. They feel guilty. They feel ashamed. They feel embarrassed. They're worried about you. They're worried about whatever is going on in their mind and how it impacts on you. So what we have learned over the years is that it ask and listen to the response and let people talk about those feelings, talk about what's going on. So important.
And there's also protecting them from people, for instance, a family member who said, oh, she's just doing that to get attention.
Very commonly said about young people. It doesn't really matter if it was happening for her, it was happening for her. She needed to release those feelings. But for years, I think it is getting better, but for years we attributed mental illness to laziness or lack of will, or why can't they just get over it? Well, I hate to say these are illnesses, and sometimes you don't just get over an illness. You don't get over heart disease or high cholesterol without some kind of intervention. And so these just don't miraculously go away on their own. You need to have treatment. You need to recognize the symptoms and then find help.
Yeah. So who can reach out to NAMI for help?
Anybody. Well, first of all, we don't charge for our services. We're here to provide service to anybody in Sonoma County, but we also speak very commonly with people who don't live here, but their loved one that they're worried about does. So we deal with both. And we have a warm line. It's a toll-free number. It's toll-free just because that makes it less expensive for somebody that might be worried about that.
Mm-hmm.
You're calling a local office. You're calling us here.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the starting place to find out about what we offer, how to get help. I wasn't in the office today, but I just came and took 3 messages. One person was asked to say she'd heard about our family support group, wants to know how to join. Very, very interested in getting that support. Another young woman called and said that her younger brother had just been arrested. He has schizophrenia. Was released from a psychiatric hospital a week ago, and she didn't tell me about the incident, but she said she pleaded with the officer to say he is sick and he needs treatment, not jail. But she was ignored, and he has gone to jail. And we will help her. We help many, many people who have someone that has been arrested, who has mental illness. It is so common for them because they get in trouble for loitering, for public drinking, or their behavior escalates within the house, and the family gets worried. The family might call 911 for help. The officer arrives, and the person gets frightened, very frightened, because they end up being handcuffed very often. We really do treat some of these crises, mental health crises, like criminal offenses, when really it's somebody that is sick and needs to be comforted and soothed in many ways. And that's why I know Sonoma County is looking at changing the model for how we provide crisis response to mental health emergencies. That's a topic being discussed across the country, but it's very exciting now because we are looking at this issue very seriously. And there are times if a weapon is involved, of course, law enforcement needs to be involved. But in so many of these crises, there is no threat of violence. There's just somebody whose behavior has escalated, has gotten out of control, and they need to be managed by somebody who's been trained in de-escalation techniques.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So in the past 8 months, we've been bombarded with COVID, wildfires, recession, job losses, educating our children at home, civil unrest, social distancing, mask wearing, homelessness, you name it, it's on the list. What impact is all of this having on our community members, and how are these issues impacting NAMI?
It's just layer upon layer upon layer of stress and uncertainty and not knowing exactly what's going to happen next, and difficult conversations, and tensions over, tensions in the political sphere, So our warm line has seen a spike in calls, but really many of those people are people saying, I'm lonely and I'm isolated, and that has to do with the restrictions around COVID-19. Many people are saying, years ago I experienced depression, but I've been just fine, but lately now I'm feeling it once again. Mm-hmm. And I think that we work a lot with the jail and families who have a loved one that's been arrested. I think I'd already mentioned that. But even within the jail, they are seeing people with increased acuity of their mental illness. And, the Sonoma County Jail is considered the largest provider of mental health services in this county, with something like somewhere around 44 to 50% of all of the inmates living with a mental illness. Mm-hmm. And it's a reflection of the lack of appropriate community services and the years in which we've been very hard on crime. We've arrested people quickly, but we're seeing everybody is stressed, and so people are reaching out to us. We have well over 100 people who participate in our family support groups, And we have nearly 100 people who have a mental illness but are in recovery. They're not in crisis, but they join our support groups. Everything's happening on Zoom right now. But we have never had so many people reach out to us for support.
So we're talking with Mary Frances Walsh, Executive Director of Sonoma County National Alliance on Mental Illness. Mary Frances, are you seeing the mental health of women in our county being impacted any differently than that of the men?
Well, this has always been the case with NAMI. We always have a preponderance of women reaching out to us because I think it is so classic that, in this case, I'm really speaking to the mothers. So often it is the mother who lifelong has been there for their son or daughter as they've gone through life with a mental illness that may have begun when they were in their maybe late teens or 20s. And that mother never stops loving that child, of course. And so they are still there trying to help that adult who may not be doing well in life, who could be homeless, and the family is not in a position to take that person, may not be safe to have that person in the house. But the mothers never, ever stop caring. And they come to us because they need support. So they will join our family support group.
Thank you. So that kind of rolls right into my next question. We women have a tendency to be taking care of others, and such as family members, and putting them above ourselves. What advice would you offer to Sonoma County women in regards to self-care?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important to limit your constant focus on what's bad out there, your constant focus on whether it's social media or reading the paper. And I'm very prone to this. I love feeling like I'm on top of what's happening, not only in our county, but across the country. So we need to just limit that. We need to take time to relax, if possible. We need time to be in a space to do something that makes us happy or makes us feel relieved and not focused on addressing the tensions of the world or our county. And there are many, many techniques. Of course, there is meditation. We are offering now since March. We have offered Zoom wellness chats and check-ins. We do that twice a week, and we offer a support groups specifically for residents of Spring Lake Village, for example. So we're offering them opportunities to learn tools and techniques that help with relaxation, that help, breathing techniques, and a safe place to talk about the tensions. It's a mix of the two.
All right, thank you. So are women in need of different services or programs than men are? Or does it kind of equal out?
I don't think so, other than the fact that, as we just have mentioned, that women tend to be, always in the nurturer role. More so, and so perhaps they have a need for support, and they actively go after it. But no, I think men need it just as much.
Okay.
I don't see a real difference.
So,
I would go ahead. I just tell you about my own interest in I've been aware of NAMI for a long time. I have a background in public health and worked in hospitals, not necessarily in mental health, but in New York City and in Chicago. But then I did spend 4 years with the Department of Psychiatry for a large Chicago hospital. And so I knew the world of mental illness from that hospital-based experience. But before that, when I was in college, and I was actually a student abroad in Madrid, my father took his own life. So I never saw that coming. I did not grow up with a father that I considered mentally ill. But when he was 63, he was forced out of a job that he didn't want to give up. The company was closing, and he didn't find other work. But I also think there is never a single reason for suicide. It's an accumulation of stressors, trauma, things that have happened over time, and then maybe some breaking circumstances like retirement and being unhappy and not knowing how to fill that time. So he didn't have a role that he knew how to fulfill anymore. It happened very quickly. It happened in the course of about 2 months that he went from feeling badly to taking his own life. It was very rapid, but this was in the 70s. And my family was clueless about what to do, how to help him, truly clueless. I think things have gotten better today, but they did not know what to do. My older sister had insisted that he go see a physician, and the physician said, well, what's going on? And my father started to cry. Not typical. And he could barely talk about it, but he began to describe the fact that he couldn't eat and he couldn't sleep. And he was haunted by the fact that he kept telling my mother, I'm a burden on you, and, I don't deserve you. And all of those are such classic signs for suicidal behavior. But the physician said to him, well, I could give you sleeping pills, but they can be addictive, so maybe better not. And that was that. There was no other intervention. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a primary care physician who wasn't really trained in how you deal with this. And there are huge movements in this country to try to provide appropriate training and understanding how to screen patients among primary care providers. Mm-hmm. But we still have a lot of work to do. Anyway, so it's that experience that's always made my heart interested in NAMI and what we do. I'm just a total believer that education about mental illness is so important. And I think that we need to start with young people who are very open to it. Mm-hmm. And we need to, what I say is normalize the conversation. So mental health is part of health. And you have a broken leg, you have, kidneys that aren't working, you have breast cancer, we seek help and we fix it. And that's the same case with any kind of mental illness.
Thank you for sharing your story. So could you spend a few moments sharing with us your knowledge in regards to Measure O, which, if approved, would raise funding for mental health, substance abuse, homelessness, and housing services? Because I have seen some ads that are a little deceptive, it seems, claiming the passing of Measure O would take away funds from police services. So
Actually, it would not. What it would do is help pay for moving the model of how we respond to mental health crises to a non-law enforcement response. Mm-hmm. So that, the county has a mobile support team. These are clinicians who are trained to respond to mental health crises, but they have, because funding is very limited, they only work from 1 to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday in the county right now. And I can tell you that mental health crises happen at night, and they happen on the weekends. So that's just simply not enough. But part of what this funding would do is help move the model so that if a family were to call 911, anyone were to call 911 because of observing behaviors that they're worried about, the dispatch person could, rather than have a law enforcement officer go to the scene, have a mobile support team, or could be in a combination of a psychiatric nurse and an EMT. There are many different models, and the county is going to look at what works right here. But we're going to move toward a model, and I think there's a pretty strong commitment from both our Board of Supervisors and Santa Rosa Police Department to move to a model where it's less police response and more mental health clinicians response. And this measure is going to help cover additional hours for those clinicians. And the police forces in Santa Rosa is fully behind this measure because they're not necessarily the best option for providing this. But I have not heard any word of it taking away funds from the police department in any way. Maybe it's going to let them do what they do better more frequently, because they are on our streets every day dealing with people in mental health crises. And this is a reflection of the fact that community-based mental health programs are completely underfunded. Not all homeless have mental illness, but many do. And those people need to be connected with services. And often they are not. They're on their own. They need supportive housing. Taking somebody with a serious mental illness who cannot function on their own and just plopping them in an apartment, it won't work. They have to have supportive housing, somebody checking in on them, somebody checking to make sure they know how to live in that apartment safely, somebody checking in on them to make sure that they're taking the medications that they need to remain stable. And that doesn't mean round-the-clock care. Mm-hmm. It means, could vary from person to person, but community-based health can be much less expensive than the kind of care we're providing now, which is totally focused on expensive crisis care, because we wait until those crises happens and people need intensive care in a psychiatric hospital setting.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge on that. How can Sonoma County residents contact NAMI for services or even to volunteer?
2 ways. They can call our warm line, and that number is 866-960-6264, or they can email us at info@namisoco.org. And we have quite an extensive website that talks about what we do and what kinds of services we offer, and there's a calendar for them. And that is NAMI-SOCO or NAMI-SonomaCounty.org.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll bring that up again at the end and remind me if I forget. We've been conversing with Mary Frances Walsh, Executive Director of Sonoma County National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI. Thank you very much, Mary Frances, for sharing your wealth of knowledge.